Okay, it doesn't look like anybody else is joining at this time. If they do, we'll be sure to let them in. Good evening again, you guys. I appreciate having you here. Greg White and Craig Karn will be here, being able to discuss with you this evening about landscape design and contractors. And in just a moment, I will switch over to a slideshow presentation that we have prepared for you guys. Please know that I'm hoping this information is of value and that you're able to utilize it, but even more so, our goal is to be able to open up for questions at the end and see how we can best help you. If you do have any questions throughout, I suggest the chat feature down below where you can write in a question, a comment, or anything along those lines, and we'll make sure to get that addressed before we disconnect from the Zoom meeting. Just to make sure everyone can hear me. And as long as you can, fantastic. If you can't, please let me know. And then it looks like everybody is muted for the most part. And I think we'll begin. So let me switch over right now. Okay, are you guys able to see the presentation?
Can.
You can, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, again, welcome. This evening we'll be focusing on working with landscape designers and contractors through the Colorado Association of Home Builders and the HBA of Metro Denver. We'll have a link to some resources. And you can also find this presentation on the HBA Denver website. Again, any questions we will be happy to address at the end. So I guess we'll begin. My name is Heather Scott. I am a business manager at Biz Graphics. We are a full service interactive and creative agency focusing on 3D visualizations for residential and commercial. And then I would like to introduce Greg White. Greg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Greg White. I'm a landscape architect. I've been in the Front Range for about 30 years now, and I work for DTJ Design. We're a multidiscipline design firm based in Boulder.
Wonderful. And Craig, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Craig Karn. I'm with Consilium Design. We're landscape architecture practice in Denver, Colorado. And we do work all up and down the Front Range. I've lived and practiced here since 1983. So Greg and I have earned our gray hairs together here.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for introducing yourself. And then I'll begin through the slides. If you want to just let me know as we move along when to change, I'll be happy to do that.
Great.
So first up, we're going to address when and how to get started.
So Craig, I'll take a first crack at some of this. I think we'll spend, we'll try to go a little bit slower here on the front end and talk about this a little bit in some detail. And then as designers, we couldn't resist peppering the second half of the slideshow with some imagery and some thoughts about things to kind of put into your heads about considerations for the design process. But really to kind of start at a high level in thinking about what's the best way and the easiest way and who to engage when it comes to kind of moving forward with design for your landscapes or kind of what you guys are going to need to do to move forward. So really one of the biggest things that we would stress in any case is kind of to develop an overall plan. Many of you may be looking at phasing or trying to figure out what to do first or how to kind of wrap your head around the whole thing. And kind of the big takeaway from some of this is to kind of take the time to step back and think about what it is that you're really trying to do, what it is that works for your family or for whomever that you're trying to design for. And so that's a really important thing. And with that is the consideration, you know, in who to engage in that process is what's your budget? How much of an appetite do you have? If you're looking at, you know, a couple roses and some turf, that's a different approach maybe than if you're looking to really knock it out of the park with fire pits and kitchens and plazas and patios and, you know, shade structures and that kind of thing. So really there's kind of two ends of the spectrum, or many ends of the spectrum, in terms of the investment you're going to make. So obviously it's important to understand that investment in terms of the value of your home, but it's also important to think about that as it comes for the enjoyment factor in life. So the kind of the tiers as we kind of have outlined here between maybe a landscape architect and a design build firm, or even kind of building it out of the garage and doing it yourself, there's still a kind of need to have an organizational plan and approach and understand kind of how you implement the plan. So one of the options for that obviously is looking at hiring a landscape architect. So a landscape architect is, you know, a design professional who's accredited, has to pass licensing. There's a lot of levels of training for landscape architects in terms of design and construction, grading and drainage, those types of things. So if you have a more complicated project, you may want to consider trying to seek out a landscape architect and have them prepare a set of plans for you. One of the advantages of that is that you can really work with the designer who is kind of an independent thinker relative to what you're going to design and build. They can produce a set of plans for you that then you can take those plans and talk to multiple groups about constructing the project. Typically, a landscape architect is not going to be saddled with whomever's going to build the project. So there's an advantage in that in terms of hiring a design professional, and you'll find many landscape architects with design build firms, but just making sure that you're getting in touch with someone who's really qualified. So the flip side then could be working with a design build firm who typically then will execute the project for you. So one of the advantages there is that they can really track the budget throughout the design process and kind of guide you through that. So if you really have a target number that you need to hit, they can help assist you in making choices in terms of material and scale and those types of things that will lead you to hopefully success on your project. One of the things we really encourage is, and we have here, is the ALCC, which is the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado, to look for someone who's in the ALCC group. Obviously, that's a reputable firm, and you really need to make sure that you're hiring someone who's going to build you a long-lasting quality project, both construction-wise and design-wise. And so both between the ASLA, which is the American Society of Landscape Architects, and there is a Colorado division, they can guide you to finding landscape architects, and ALCC can also assist with finding good design build firms. And obviously, word of mouth goes a long way. If you have friends that have had projects built and they really love the contractors, you know, that's kind of a really great recommendation as well. But even to the point of, if you're going to build it yourself, I would still tell you to circle back and either talk to any one of the two previous groups we've mentioned and take the time to work through getting a good solid plan and making sure that you know whether it's phased or what it's going to be, that you don't preclude doing something in the future by doing something, you know, right away. That's kind of an impetus. So really planning, just like in a home design and anything else, good thoughtful planning is really important.
I would add that, you know, I think design build is a really good route to go, likely for most of you, depending on the, you know, the scale of your landscape project and your lot and your home. The really great design build firms, they still address design with you. They'll have a design team, and they'll address that as a really an initial exercise of engaging them. And so that's the important thing, that if you're working with a design build contractor, it doesn't mean skip design till later. That they'll have a great design team, and there are several great firms all around the Front Range of Denver that can help you out in that regard. But ask for that expertise and make sure they have the experience. One of the things about designing for fire, we all as professionals in the industry are learning a lot of late about this. I'm sure Greg would, tell you the same thing. But make sure you're working with people who are seeking out the answers and willing to invest in innovation and giving them some creativity on the process.
Hop to the next slide. And this is just kind of a repeat of the slide, but you can see the kind of level of drawings that underlaid here, where you're really going to get into some specific controls and design when you're working with the design professionals. And so this is a good example of kind of how where you might end up with a really specific plan that guides, whether it's phase 1, 2, 3, or you're doing the whole enchilada at once. So you can hop to the next slide, Heather. Craig, you want to attack this one?
Sure, right. The first thing there on the bullets is it doesn't have to cost more. You should be wanting to make it an investment in the design. Again, even with design build firms, some of the firms will tell you design is free. The better design build firms will tell you that this is how much we're going to invest in design with you as a part of the process. And in fact, spending time on design and having a plan where you save money is mistakes made along the way by not having a good plan of attack. So that's why you want to invest in a plan and check yourself every step along the way. Are we truly following this plan, and how's it working out for us? Again, and then it gives you an opportunity. You have an opportunity through the challenges you all have faced to really revisit how your whole home and how the landscape can work with your home. And so, investing time in that is a good thing to do. The quality of materials can be as important as planting design, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's an opportunity to, hopefully live with it for a long, long time, just like the investment you're making in rebuilding your homes. I think, and Greg can speak to this too. Make sure that you're carrying out a vision of, carrying the home out into the landscape, and that it feels a part of the whole investment and not just an afterthought. So that's again why planning ahead will help you maximize that value of that investment. Please add anything else, Greg.
No, I think you nailed it, Craig. And I think the concept of proper space planning and relationships and those kinds of things are really important. And you can take the same amount of materials and place them in different arrangements, and one will be successful and one won't be, or be less successful, and it can cost the exact same amount. So it is really, really important to take the time, and sometimes the design process can feel like it's arduous or a burden, but I think it really is important to try to have the conversations, or have the even if it's your own internal visioning process, to really do that and spend the energy to kind of flush out the things that are really going to make your outdoor living successful and give you what you achieve, the dream that you really want. So and then obviously just smart investment, in these days, everyone's looking for that vacation in their backyard, and so that's something to really get designed right.
So, right, so moving on here to what are the latest trends in residential design?
Sure, I'll go through this, and Greg, certainly jump in if you have anything you want to add along the way. Indoor outdoor living, that you have this unique opportunity to have to deal with the tragedy that you all face, to revisit and really look for opportunities to bring the indoors out into your outdoor spaces so they feel like extensions of the home. Opportunities for outdoor kitchens and barbecue. As you do that, think about an important thing, obviously, for fire-wise planning is where you place those in relation to the home. People make a lot of mistakes in that regard, and taking advantage of the opportunity you have to make that truly an outdoor kitchen and not just a grill sitting outside the back door. the opportunity, if you may have already had these great spaces and want to put them back in, of course, is, meaningful gathering spaces outside. The features that are very popular are certainly is a fireplace. And actually, gas fireplaces can be very safe alternative to, you certainly don't want to be burning wood, not only for safety, but just for air quality. Most jurisdictions are restricting that anyway. Lighting is a really easy thing to do to really add a lot of dynamic to your outdoor space and extend the hours that you can use it and, be out, especially like this time of year. The weather and the temperature is great outside. It's just getting dark a little earlier. There are a lot of new things you can do with fencing and panels and things. Again, that can be, more fire safe as well. And we've got a couple examples with some images that we can share with you. But yeah, again, thinking about opportunities to do something more than replacing the old the wooden cedar fence that you had that disappeared in a heartbeat in the fire. And we'll show you some other examples and things to think about in terms of firewire materials as you create your design. Anything you want to add, Greg?
Nope, that's great.
All right. Here we go. We get to the fun stuff. We thought the best thing to do is to and pictures tell 1,000 words, and we practice this certainly every day in our firm, to share images of people to get them excited about what can happen and not fret so much about the challenges of doing something new and maybe you're not feel that real familiar with. But you can see a lot of things. I love that decorative. I'm sure that's probably a steel panel in the image on the upper right. Things you can do to recreate privacy in your yard and materials that are fire safe. A lot of these what may look like wood fences, there are a lot of great replacement materials that are much more fire resistant that can give you the look of wood without actually building a wood fence and just contributing to fuel for a potential fire.
Yeah, I'll touch on a few of those real quick if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead, please.
In thinking about the fire features, surrounded by hardscape, and obviously, as Craig mentioned, that the gas fireplace, it doesn't emit sparks, and so the embers are the things that we're obviously paying attention to. But the scale of the spaces, whether it's a simple patch of turf or a little water feature, just those types of things that can really add the kind of charm and atmosphere. The top right, just the simple lighting. We've all got access to high-end lighting or Home Depot lighting, and just some simple string lights and things like that can really go a long way in creating the ambiance and then whether it's to a grill or what your outdoor kitchen needs might be, but just thinking about that in a way that the casual day of cooking can still be a conversation and strategically locating seating and those kinds of things in proximity in a way that every day can become an opportunity to have that conversation. So this is a lot of kind of more on the hardscape realm, and we'll talk about the landscape realm. One of the things we will touch on these days is the approach to just thinking about water-wise as well as fire-wise design, and we're showing some very restrained use of turf, maybe even in synthetic turf in the middle case, but not that we're saying that that's the solution, but just thinking about that and how you can take a smaller portion of your space and maybe build that a little more hardscape. That becomes the hub of the space, where then as you move away from that or move away from the house, maybe it becomes a little bit more open and more use of turf and that kind of stuff. Greg, you want to talk about some of these?
Sure. These are just a couple or two or three good examples of ways that you can, a lot of your homes, you may have been abutting open space or had open space through the community you live in out there. And in a lot of cases, those were probably, 3-rail wooden fences. These are some great alternatives that still give you that ranch effect. And they're all made out of, these are all concrete or concrete polymer products. And the image up on the right is actually just Corten steel fence. But again, you still get that great ranch look, and you eliminate that flammable material from your backyard. The picture down on the left is actually in a community I worked on a lot of years ago down in Colorado Springs, and they've used that throughout the community for years now. The other thing is you're going to get a lot longer lifespan and a lot more durability out of these materials too. So it's worth the investment in that regard. That concrete cedar fence, 3-rail fence there is going to last 50 or 100 years, as opposed to maybe if you're lucky, you get 20, 25 years out of any cedar fence post stuck in the ground. I think an important thing to consider is many of your homes may have had decks for a big part of your outdoor living space, and you may still have some grades you have to take up, and you can't totally eliminate decks, but some of the other earlier images you saw too. Rich paving materials are a great alternative, and can be way lower maintenance in the future for you than maintaining a wood deck. So look for opportunities to maybe build a patio, and there's from stone to there's pavers, and even just concrete panels can be done very artfully. And the image in the middle is just a concrete patio with some colored banding on it. Pretty simple things to execute. Again, they'll last a whole lot longer, and you'll spend a whole lot less time, restaining them every 2 or 3 years as well. So it's good to consider, changing if you had decks, to see if there's ways you can maybe reduce the deck areas and create other outdoor patio areas.
Yeah, there's an unending amount of good products these days that are becoming a lot more affordable in terms of the pavers. That's even something that if you're ambitious, you can do yourself. You just got to make sure you get the base done right and you pound a lot of sand. But there's a lot of fun options, and I'm sure you see them all at the improvement stores all over. And I think that's a really good way to kind of add some texture. And like Craig said, it's a much more durable material. Anything that gives me my Saturday back is worth a few more dollars for me.
And you may find that they might be more affordable on a square foot basis, given where the prices of lumber are certainly the kind of lumber you'd want to use for a deck, or even more expensive, some of the synthetics like Trex and other things. They have a great lifespan. They're maybe not quite as flammable, but they're still have a lot of flammable materials in them. And they can be quite expensive. So don't count out other paving opportunities before you take a look at them.
So obviously, a lot of the more current conversations about landscape are focused on trying to think a little more sustainably about that, and some of the concept of the third landscape, and that's all the little leftover pieces in the world, and how when they're done thoughtfully, they actually add up to be a lot. They're actually huge small spaces in terms of impact in overall for kind of habitat and air quality and all those things. So we're always kind of pushing for that kind of thought process relative to sustainable planting. And as I mentioned, really one of the things is to really think about functional turf spaces. We're moving away from everything being covered with grass and irrigating small spaces that are inefficient, that causes a lot of water runoff, those kinds of things. Think about how you use the lawn space as a kid, as a dogs, is it just you, as a visual? That should inform kind of how you think about the design. And to some extent, even how it gets irrigated. Very, very complex and funky shapes are a lot harder to irrigate. You get a lot more overspray, actually more costly for the water and for the irrigation equipment if you are irrigating it. And there are quite a few turf types these days that really don't need that much water. I think, Craig, I shouldn't steal your quote. I don't know, was it a beer in one hand and a hose in the other? That's your irrigation system.
Yeah, that's the extent of a good irrigation system.
I like that idea. So anyway, that's kind of one of the things we're always promoting, is really thinking about the lawn as a special piece and the centerpiece of some of that. And then relative to the use of, Craig will touch on this a little bit, thinking about more native and adapted xeric plants, they're just going to survive they're going to be less, likely to be flammable. They're going to tolerate the drought better. They're going to tolerate, the winters better. They're just adapted and want to be here. So there's a lot of really great plants that we can be using. And then in turn, they're a lot more wildlife and pollinator friendly. People who have gardens, these type of plants really get the bees going, and that helps our gardens crank and all of our food sources. As I mentioned, just the concept of being much more water wise with our landscapes than we have been in the past is really not that trendy of thinking. It's wise thinking, and we're all seeing what's happening in the West these days. So, and then as we mentioned, the Firewise theme is really thinking about the kind of plant material, things that don't have a lot of sap or resins, and things that will be less flammable. And then obviously the proximity considerations. I know this conversation is a little bit new to all of us in terms of the urban environment and how much we're thinking about this more than I guess we used to. But that's just kind of where we are. And then thinking about that with the seasonal approach to the planting design in terms of there's more to it than maybe just petunias out there, and thinking about texture in the winter and all those other things. And there's a lot of plants that are appropriate here that bring that kind of texture, which is really interesting in the snow and in the seasonal elements. So
yeah, I think it's important to remember that, using native plants by their very nature, they're designed to retain water. They have to, survive for extended periods without water. And so when we get in a drought condition and you get a high risk, fire conditions, the natives are retaining more moisture. When you do more water demanding non-natives, and as long as you keep the water on them, they do great, and they create a very lush landscape. We get in water restrictions or in a real, extended drought condition, and you can't water them. Those non-natives create a greater fire risk because they just can't hold moisture through the drought. And the other thing, which depends on, some of you may be on larger lots, other much more smaller kind of urban lot scale, is it's creating this defensible space. And you can go to most of the county websites or CSU and the like, and they'll explain the premise of what you're trying to do is keep the fire ideally from moving from the ground up into the crown of trees. So, keeping ladder fuels away from the home is what's important. Lower branches on trees, trying to, don't put a lot of large or taller growing shrubs near your house, because what happens is where most fires start on your home in an event is up under the eaves. In fact, you may have heard some other presentations from architects and the like, that we're trying to keep the fire from getting on the ground up to the eave of your home, because that's where that usually is a pretty common place that ignites the home. And so there's guidelines for that. Some jurisdictions, Pitkin County and others, it's ordinance about where you can place trees proximate to your home. And so research that. It doesn't mean you don't have to have that you can't have landscape though. And so we'll show you some good examples that Greg had talked about of natives and naturalizing species that they survive without any water. I saw a chat question pop up, actually made me think about it again, about with expansive soils. That's a benefit of native plants, because you're not adding water to the soil nearly as much around the foundation of your house. The question was about paving. And again, some of these dry laid paving and things that you can put down, if you're keeping the water down, that's probably the most important thing. And a benefit of laying pavers on sand and things like that is, if some of them do move, it's fairly easy for you to reset them. Just if you were the do-it-yourselfer that built it in the first place, you can go out in a year or two and reset any of them, as opposed to when you've poured a slab of concrete and then it moves, you have a little bit bigger problem in trying to fix it. Let's move on to some more of the fun pictures. Greg, tell us about some of this.
Well, these are all places I know, and for example, most of these are in non-irrigated conditions. So, I mean, a little bit of the idea is that the xeriscape can be pretty dry. The middle top image is really about a judicial use of small patio scale and a small lawn area that really is a thoughtful shape. It's useful. It looks deliberate, and it's a really nice kind of soft accent in a smaller space. But the use of these real dry native plants, and then even some other plants that are spring water fed or snow water fed, spring rain fed, seasonal things like the lupines and those types of things, but the coneflowers and sages and those kinds of things, and a lot of the ornamental grasses these days are really really resilient to drought and those types of things. So there's a lot of amazing options out there in terms of that, and you can get formal to to informal with all of these types of designs and plants where things look a little more organized or they look a little more relaxed, and that's really a personal taste. But this is kind of a little bit of just the flavor that you can achieve and still being sustainable.
Very good.
And I think Craig will touch on this. This background image is here in Colorado. Again, a very dry landscape. Things of yuccas and primrose and even some ornamental grasses, those kinds of things. So, thinking about the texture and the contrast of some of these shapes, a lot of the even the succulents and the natives are really awesome for shapes and texture. And there are lots of color. The thing is that, xeriscape doesn't have to be boring and just be a juniper and a rock. It can be lots of color. Using hardscape accents, boulders, and those kinds of things mixed in the plants in the planting's always good. That gives you even a seasonal texture, and thinking about turf as an accent. And like I mentioned, you could use fully native or adapted plants in if you like the layered look and something more organized, that they can serve that purpose as well. So lots of different ways, but thinking about maybe a different kind of palette of plants than what we've been using in the past. And again, some just fun images of dry landscapes and using ground covers as maybe the idea of a turf or something like that. Or you can use turf, but use it in a way that it's the contrast and the accent to some of the other plantings, or the idea of almost making micro environments, kind of a matrix planting mix where you mix many of the same plants together. The top right image is an example of 5 or 6 different plants just mixed organically, but it kind of visually glues the whole design together, and that's creating kind of a little micro environment where these plants can kind of work together, and that's always a good thing for the plants. If one dies out, you don't really know, that kind of thing. That's kind of a design trick in terms of having a little less maintenance on some of your landscapes.
This is something kind of close to me, is the opportunity to bring cacti and succulents into the landscape, especially for firewise landscapes. They're just great examples of plants that, by their very nature, store a lot of moisture within them and will grow without any supplemental irrigation. And they're just the rose of the desert. They're my favorites, and you have to think about placement, obviously. But I tell you, if you have places around your home where you don't want people to go, the cacti and yuccas and things like that can make a great natural fence as well. But out along, if you're back to an open space or anywhere where you can work them into the landscape, they're just a wonderful addition, and they're quite easy to grow. They literally grow on their own, and there are lots of other succulents you can discover at any wherever your nearest garden center is, or talk with your designer about it. But their very nature is to hold all the water they need for a whole season. So they're really great. In Southern California, it's very common to see ice plant, like the images there on the lower right-hand corner. They'll have whole slopes they planted with that, with the very purpose of it being a fire barrier. We can jump to the next slide. There's a long list. CSU has a great list of what they recommend for firewise plants, and you can go to that. They're overwhelmingly natives. These are just some great examples, all of which will survive on their own. If you water them in when you plant them, that's the last time you'll ever have to water them. And they create a real dynamic, right? They bring a real dynamic form into the garden and can really be quite attractive in courtyard situations. Again, think about placement. And a lot of them aren't as pokey as they look, so talk with your nurseryman about that. I put some of these pictures together. You know, Greg had mentioned earlier in our talk about how, you know, a lot of conifers by their nature, they have more resins in them, so they can create a greater fire hazard. In particular, junipers. A lot of jurisdictions are already talking about, you know, outlawing junipers within their jurisdiction because they see them as such a fire risk. Even if they just start, you know, get restrictions on where you place them, these are just some great examples of native species that can bring evergreen into the landscape without having to plant, and you know, whatever cultivar or shape or form of juniper. The curl leaf mountain mahogany is spectacular. In fact, it's one of the oldest growing species of trees on the planet. So once you get one going in your yard, it's there for the long haul. They're really that easy to grow, and you give them a little drip irrigation and they just grow like crazy. And then the manzanitas and kinnikinick in the lower right-hand corner, that's a Colorado native, grows through all the montane, you know, foothills around Boulder and you know, west side of Arvada and the like. So those are just a couple examples, but that can be some great alternatives to, you know, kind of the typical plant materials that get sold at Home Depot and places like that. So hopefully we'll see the industry, you know, convincing Home Depot that they should be making more of these species available. You want to speak to any of this again, Greg? I think we talked about it.
Yeah, just these are some, there should be some links in this, the ALCC, like I said, easy to find, lots of resources here for membership, member resources, trying to find, you know, find a landscape professional. It's right there in the top. It's a good way to kind of to poke around and see what's happening in the industry, find somebody to talk to. There's obviously Colorado Green. Hey, there's a project right there in the middle I recognize. Thanks for that, Heather. Yeah, so this is a really good resource, and this would be a great place. And like Craig mentioned, there are a lot of very, very talented and quality design build firms around the Front Range. And so you know, you can't go wrong with running into some of these really established firms with good reputations. If you can go back, Heather, if you can figure that out, you're good. The American Society of Landscape Architects, again, this is professional registered landscape architects, and there's a lot of information here. You can poke around, and you can also go on the DORA website, the state of Colorado, and you can look up licensed landscape architects, find out who's currently licensed, if there's, you know, what's going on in their world. So and then the last resource I think we had on there is there was something about Landscapes for Life, and then there's always
This is tied to CSU.
Yep, to
directly.
CSU.
Mhm.
CSU has an amazing amount of thoughtful resources
Mhm.
when it comes to plant lists or how-tos, or, you know, they've got a 3-page, you know, thing on how to grow lavender in Colorado, which is a great plant, you know, and how to, you know, small trees, big trees, native trees, you know, any things I saw, you know, advice on how to deal with issues with your turf or whatever. That there's a lot of good information there. So I'm constantly Googling CSU, you know, whatever my problem is, and there's a lot of information around that. So anyway, I think we were maybe a little long-winded and heavy on the kind of design and plant side. I guess from our perspective, we probably assume that you guys have been having a lot of conversations about Firewise everything when it comes to the home and materials and the landscape. So we kind of wanted to not just talk about that. So we saw this as an opportunity to talk about kind of moving forward and things for you guys to think about. So, but and as Craig mentioned, there's a lot of resources, whether it's Boulder County or, you know, CSU or wherever, in terms of looking at the fire-wise, advice and understanding kind of zones 1, 2, and 3 in defensible space and all of that. And we're kind of assuming you guys have probably all done some homework at that level, given kind of what everybody's gone through. So we were going to hit you with a little bit of a different bent. So, but we're happy to answer any and all questions that we can regarding anything that we've talked about or anything else that's up for anybody who's on the call.
I'm gonna switch off of this screen share real quick and come back to everybody. It does look like Craig was able to address Robert's question. And then Cindy was our first one talking about weeds and how they will continue to keep growing or, potentially keep growing given the hydro mulch that was set. Can you address anything with that?
Craig, you want to speak to that or?
How to manage the weed problem you have now? Is that the question?
Yeah, I can't see the question.
Oh, yeah, you bet. It says, what do we do about all the weeds on our lots that have sprouted from the hydro mulch? Afraid weeds will keep growing through new landscaping. Thank you.
Well, I can't necessarily speak to your particular situation, but there's an important process, and if you work with a contractor right now, weeds are Mother Nature's solution to the fire. And so they're playing a natural role. They're the first volunteers to be able to grow in and grow on the soils that have been damaged by the fire or just lost the other landscape. So it's Mother Nature doing her best to try to fix it. The important thing to do is to manage the weeds as a part of reestablishing your landscape. If you want to get native grasses growing or anything, you need to invest some time, and there's a process by how you can manage weeds before you make the investment in any new seeding and the like. And then in any reseeding, if you're trying to reestablish a native area, wherever you might be doing, you're going to have 2 to 3 years of where you're going to need to manage weeds. And there are companies out there that can help in that regard. But the best thing you can do is stay on top of them, make the investment in the first couple of years before you put any new landscape in, and as you're helping it establish. And a well-designed landscape will overcome that problem in a matter of a couple of years of investment. But it depends on just the scale of the project you're tackling.
It sounds like there's some weeds coming in with hydro mulch, that's an unfortunate
shouldn't be
situation, because that should be controlled in terms of the purity of that seed that's provided. But if that's something that's established, as Craig mentioned, mechanical removal is obviously the best way, and that's a real pain in the butt. I wouldn't particularly recommend any kind of hardcore application of
only if you have really invasive issues with thistle or something.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously a way to do it. But even if if there's something that's a little more environmentally friendly, and that may just be hand spraying, that kind of stuff, and then pulling the weeds that you can, and like Craig said, that it's really important to make sure that whether you're throwing down cardboard and newspaper for a while and managing an area at a time as you improve it, that's something that you're going to have to really try to attack right out of the gate before the new landscape goes in. And the one good thing about I'm kind of accused of being a plant stuffer, but if you eventually get your landscape so full that it has a tendency to smother out the weeds and that kind of stuff to some extent. So by covering the ground with good mulch, we find that rock mulch, I'm using a lot more fine rock mulch than I used to. If you have a deep enough layer, it can be just as good as bark mulch in terms of retaining moisture underneath, and preventing weeds from getting to the soil surface. So that's pretty important. There's a lot of it's too hot for the plants. I don't think that that's actually the truth if you're using kind of a reasonable palette of plants, and like I said, eventually your plants are covering the mulch, and that heat reflectivity or collection is not really an issue. But that's kind of one way. I guess that's for later steps in terms of managing the weeds.
Thank you, guys. Cindy, please let us know if this didn't address your question or if you have additional thoughts. I do have a hand raised from Corinne. Corinne, if you're able to unmute, please go right ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is we have gone through like our permit package and our contract with our builder, and part of that is slope and grade for water runoff, and our contract's, you know, very specific about it also, that the landscaping can't mess up the slope and grade after our build for water runoff. So how do you all implement those plans to make sure we keep the slope and grade that we worked so hard for? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think some of that comes from, well, and again, that points to really trying to work with qualified individuals, you know, that really understand the grading and drainage. Obviously, I'm sure you're talking about foundations and that kind of things in terms of keeping the water away, and you've got your 10 feet at, you know, 10% or whatever that may be, and this you know, between the yard swales and all of those things that we're familiar with. I think that as long as you are maintaining, you know, a hardscape slope that meets industry standards, that's, you know, 2% or more away from the house. Obviously, you don't want these great slopes on your hardscapes that make your furniture not function, and, you know, those kinds of things. And if you're talking about, I don't know if you're talking about wall conditions or if you're talking about aggressive slopes to get, you know, down to existing grade, or you're talking about slopes just around the home to just really provide that positive drainage. Is because that,
well,
if that
for
was
instance, like we have a walkout basement, so like
Okay.
our whole house is like has a hill, so you have to like maintain that slope of the yard, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's where the logic test hopefully can pass. If it's a hardscape situation, as long as you are providing positive drainage on that hardscape, and this may be a case where we're talking about the materials, where, for example, the concrete pavers, they're a little more porous. You have a you know, a gravel sub base and then sand, and then you have the pavers, and the water will go through that system, and that's the intent of it. It kind of drains, versus say a concrete patio, which, as long as it's designed properly and it slopes away from your house, that's a totally reasonable solution to be able to maintain a functional space, but that's going to drain positively. And if there's other slopes that you need to kind of alter, I think that's one of the things that you would just work through with a design professional who could really give you some advice, you know, kind of on a specific lot by lot basis. But I would say that I haven't run up against a project where I haven't been able to maintain positive drainage as well as achieve kind of what you're looking for in terms of kind of a functional living space or outdoor living or whatever that may be.
What happens often, and what they're trying to steer you away from with the requirement, is that, you know, the civil engineer, when the lot's created, if it's new construction, or your home, your architect, and you know, whoever's doing that grading plan, they want to make sure that lot drains to the street. So they create swales right around the home. And what you want to do is not disrupt that. What often happens is a homeowner comes in and goes, "Oh, I'd love to have a raised garden." But they build that raised garden right where that swale's draining the water out of their backyard. And so then it creates a dam, accumulate water, and then you have the potential for foundation problems. So that's what they mean by that. That it's not that you can't terrace that slope if you want to make it more useful. It's actually easier to get landscapes to grow it when you terrace it, because it discourages the runoff. But they don't want you to build a wall across the swale around your house. That's really the premise. But if you're going to do any of that, certainly, again, go back and make sure you have an experienced professional, the landscape architect or a civil engineer, whoever, that they don't inadvertently create a duck pond somewhere on your lot with improvement.
Thanks. And then the second part was, at what point should we engage a landscape architect? Because if we go too early, I mean, we have workers and equipment and all that, but if we go too late, we move into a mud lot that has no grass. So where do we do this in the process? And it, like, thinking about seasons and everything, and complicated.
That's a very good question. Because it does get complicated, and sequence is important. You know, the design, you know, typically, or in a perfect world, the design is happening very closely with the parallel to, with the builder or whatever, in a way that, one, if you need to run a gas line for an outdoor grill, or if you want a little bit of power in the backyard, or what it may be, that's being thought about up front in a way that the sequencing of the construction allows for, at least, whether you're just putting in blank conduit, PVC pipe that you could push out, utilities later, or whatever that may be, and thinking about how does living situation work in terms of the design. I don't think you can be too early in terms of actually then working through the process of construction. That's really important in terms of sequence. You're right, you may, if you want the 5-ton boulder in your backyard, there's a time to move that into the backyard and then work your way out, and before the fence is built or whatever that may be. So I think you probably can't be too early to at least be talking to a designer about some of those things, and I think they can advise you if they have a sense for where, what your needs are in terms of outdoor space and landscape and that kinds of things that they can help you with. And it may be a multi-season thing that they do trees in the fall and they come back and do the rest in the spring, or whatever it may be, because your point about moving into a mud yard is not something, that's not something you want to end up saddled with. So I think sooner than later, I guess, would be my advice in terms of the design discussion, and then relying on the professional to help you with the sequencing.
Yeah, because if you have your plan for hardscape, if you need new walks or anything like that, the sooner you can get them in before weather settles in, even if the landscape itself has to wait till next spring or some of it a following fall, you want to be able to get in and out of the front door in the interim. So like Greg says, it's kind of never too soon to start the design, and that'll give you the flexibility to decide how you can phase the work and not have some of those, oh, I wish we had thought about that before we put the fence up around the property and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think, Craig, just to touch on that, the hardscapes can really expand you can start doing hardscapes and those types of construction, earlier and later into the year than you can planting design. We are planting, we just can't be planting in March because we know what kind of weather we get, especially with, material that's not well rooted. It can freeze. Same with the fall. If it's just not, some plants are not wanting to, endure some of that cold right away. And so finding that window of the right time to plant into the fall when the soil's still warm, as opposed to in, November or, in February, your chances of survival are a lot better. So you can be doing other improvements, a little more year round based on what the kind of the short-term weather is.
Thank you, guys. I do have a question from Barbara. She asks, what can we do about the crops of aspens that are growing as thick as lawns right now in those empty lots, and keep them from sprouting on our lots? Is it a similar solution, as you said, with the weeds, or is it different?
Well, that's a tough one. The aspen are demonstrating that wonderful reaction to adversity by flourishing again. What, you got any ideas, Greg? I'm trying to think about how you.
Well, I mean, they may be aspen, they may be cottonwoods. I don't know, either
Yeah.
one. It's basically an underground connected plant, so their root systems are, more rhizomous, and they'll travel around and pop up. That's kind of, like Craig said, an interesting phenomenon. That's more of a probably mechanical thing as well. I don't know if it's something intruding into other lots, but it's
if it's coming from a neighboring lot into your lot, you may have to just you can cut it, you can trench it. The landscape contractor can basically root prune the roots at your property line. That's what they're doing. They're spreading out underground, and you could do that to at least fight back a little bit. I would think that would help.
It's obviously a slower thing than the weeds that have popped up, but it will continue to kind of migrate a little bit. So that's probably a discussion with neighbor to neighbor as well, as best as can be.
How you can collectively manage it. That would be a good idea.
All right, hopefully that answered your question, Barbara. If there's any other questions, please let us know. It's an open floor right now for anything and everything you guys have questions on regarding landscaping.
And I'm glad to field a call or an email or anything if anybody has any questions along the way.
As am I.
Good luck to all of you through getting ready for winter, through the winter, to be ready to do some great new landscape work at your homes hopefully next year.
All right, well, fantastic. I don't know that I see any other questions coming in, but just a reminder, the slideshow presentation, the recording from this evening will be available under the Marshall Fire Resources through the HVA Denver website. We do have those links to the sites that we referenced earlier. And again, there's a lot of resources for you guys to be able to reach out to, depending upon what your needs are at different levels, different timing. But hopefully this information was beneficial for you. And we sure do wish you the best. So Greg and Craig, thank you so much for your expertise and your time. Appreciate you doing this evening. And to all of you guys on the call, thank you for joining us this evening. And again, we wish you the best.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.